right now, the Democratic Party is in utter disarray.
Yeah.
This is one of the arguments in favor of the idea that Republicans might be able to defy history because, quite frankly, I don't really get the vibe that the Democratic Party has really learned much of anything from the last election. Like, for example, there was this guy, this state legislator in Texas that went on Joe Rogan's podcast a few days ago, and nothing that he said implied that the Democratic Party has learned anything.
The only one that I've seen that I feel like is kind of gets it, like Rahm Emanuel, which is a little bit ironic to me because Rahm Emanuel was part of he was the
Never let a crisis go to waste.
Chief of staff for the Obama administration, and he was actually pretty critical in pushing things. However, I will say that he's always been kind of more on the economic populism side of the Democratic Party as opposed to like the woke side. But that doesn't mean he wasn't a key part of the administration that ushered in woke and started to make it mainstream. So it's a little bit disingenuous coming from
John Fetterman has said some similar stuff.
Yeah, Fetterman seems to get it. He seems to be more of kind of a like the old school union style Democrat. The other ones that have kind of like Bill Maher. Bill Maher obviously understands that wokeness has kind of gone nuts. But Carville to some degree, Carville's just kind of so obnoxious to listen to sometimes. But he does seem to understand that there's a problem with. Well, I'll put it this way. And I was talking to Dr. Steve Turley, who just wrote the book America Awakened. And one of the things he talks about in his book is this like never-ending Democrat death spiral where they go all in on 80-20 positions. And what that means is 20% of the country cares about this issue. 80% either doesn't care or has a problem with it. And the Democrats make it their whole persona. Transing the kids is a perfect example of this. Now, the thing I would fire back on is you need to understand it isn't 20% of their base. It's actually a significant portion of their base because that's the sort of base they've created.
And what they do over time is they turn 80-20 issues into 80-20 issues the other way because once they do get power, it might take them a while, but once they do get power, they just ram it through anyway. They ram it through the courts. They did it with gay marriage, right?
Yeah. I mean, Obama lit up the whole White House with the gay pride.
And so they are very aggressive about once they're in power, they don't back off or moderate. We run away from our issues when we get elected, right? We decide somebody once said that Republicans campaign as libertarians and then govern like Democrats.
Yeah. Well, my argument is that I said, I'll give this much to the Democrats. When Democrats are in the minority, they act like they're in the majority. And when they're in the majority, they act like there'll never be another election.
Yeah.
Republicans, on the other hand, when we're in the majority, we act like we're in the minority. And when we're in the minority, we just act like cowards. And
But, the Democrats have been so used to winning, to quote our current president, for the last, really basically my whole lifetime, that I don't think that they're really used to being in an environment where, no, they are currently the minority. And it's not just in the sense that they've lost an election. Like, they lost the popular vote in the last election. They lost every single swing state. The entire country shifted 6 points to the right in 2024. That's one of the largest shifts of any election from left to right or right to left in my lifetime, in the last 30 years. And on that point, I don't see any signs that the Democratic Party has learned anything. A good example is there's this poll that just came out really recently by Quinnipiac. I've got it pulled up here.
Yeah.
That shows that, what is this? A 19% approval rating for the Democratic Party, and 72% disapprove.
Quinnipiac is not a right-wing pollster. It's generally well respected on all sides.
What's so funny about this is that this has dropped even further. At one point, it was like in the mid-20s. And so there's no sign that this is going to slow down. Now, some people look at this and was like, oh, see, the Democrats are going to get crushed in the next election because look at how high their disapproval rating is. A lot of this are Democrats disapproving of their own party. We had the same phenomenon during the Obama era where polling showed consistently that the Republican Party was more unpopular than the Democratic Party. And so on the left, they were always using this as, oh, dude, I remember when I was like in high school and in early college, 2011, 2012, all of these like smug liberals that were like, oh, these extremist Tea Party Republicans, they're never going to win anything ever again. Look at how deeply unpopular they are. The American people aren't going to accept that. Like these were the same people that, would read the Washington Post and listen to NPR, and they were just such enlightened, they didn't, just so full of themselves.
Yeah.
And they were totally blindsided when 2016 came along because they thought that the extent of the Overton window went as far as Ted Cruz on the right.
Yeah.
And that's it. You couldn't go any farther.
Not even that far. He was an extremist. Mitt
Romney was called a fascist. He was literally. There's
Yeah.
a piece by NPR. I don't have it pulled up, but there's a piece by NPR where they called him a fascist in the 2012 presidential election because he recited the Pledge of Allegiance at his rallies.
Yeah.
And you know, I know that you and I actually have some issues with the history behind it. It was
side issue.
But still, the point is that people look at this and they're like, well, the Democratic Party's kind of doomed because they're so unpopular. They're in a hole, but I assure you, they're going to try to dig out of that hole. They're just trying to figure. They're looking for the shovel right now to dig out of it.
Anybody that's sitting here predicting, the Democrats are done. Like, I'm sorry, you're not. I can't take that seriously. I think you're absolutely right that when we look at, if you were to ask me who is the current leader of the Democratic Party, I really couldn't give you a name. Like, nobody's questioning. First of all, nobody's questioning who the leader of the Republican Party is. It's Donald Trump. I would argue. I would go so far as to say, very few people right now would question who we think the successor is going to be. I mean, if it were today, it would be J.D. Vance, right? And so, in many cases, whether you like Republicans, don't like Republicans, we obviously Republicans have their own issues and whatnot. There seems to be cohesion with respect to leadership and direction for the most part. With the Democrats, I can't tell you who their leader is. And then the other thing too is that the people that they are selecting in their own primaries right now, Mamdani is a perfect example of this. They picked a trust fund communist, right, to be their mayoral candidate in New York City, right, to run against the current, incumbent black was Democrat, now independent, mayor of New York. And when we say independent, he's not really an independent. He's definitely on the left, but he's not a crazy person. And more of the people that are not crazy are being pushed out of Democrat leadership positions.
Dean Phillips said something similar. He was the obscure congressman that ran against Joe Biden in the primaries and obviously got crushed. Yeah. And then Biden, it was correct, all of his criticisms of Biden, because then Biden dropped out of the race. Dean Phillips said a couple of weeks ago, he's like, I don't think that the Democratic Party has a place for somebody like me and Mamdani. And I'm starting to see that their approach to we're the coalition of the ascendant. Yeah. We're the new rising majority. Yeah. No, your coalition's going to keep fraying as you bring in new voting blocks that are going to end up competing with each other. It's the same problem that, like, for example, the Labour Party has in the UK. Yeah. They had this idea for so long. Well, let's just have open borders and import in new voters because we can't win over the current voters in the UK. Well, turns out that eventually you get to a point where there's a critical mass of these new voters and they just vote for their own guys. They don't end up voting for you. The same problem is going to end up happening within the Democratic Party in the U.S. We have so many different new voting blocks that it's not enough for them to just be like, well, we're just going to be the party of all the minorities. Yeah. Well, but they all have their own different interests. And it's not just on a racial or ethnic basis. You also have it within ideologies. Mm-hmm. You have it within culture. You have it within religion. There's almost an infinite number of ways that you can slice and dice the Democratic coalition. And if the only thing that they have in common is, well, we're not Republicans, that's not enough to maintain a coalition eventually. You're going to end up losing groups. They're going to end up splintering off, doing their own thing, dragging the party in a direction that maybe you as a whole don't want, and it's going to make your brand look toxic over time.
I was going to also add to that you can kind of see what happened with David Hogue, where he got caught like on a hot mic saying, okay, well, yeah, we believe this, but we're not going to message it that way. We can't talk about this. Yeah. And him saying we can't talk about this, whatever extreme idea it was, I can't remember what it was, but exposing that, like, even on the left, they're trying to figure out how do we message this to the general public, because we know this idea is kind of extreme, so we're going, even though we believe it, we're not going to talk about it. And he got pushed out because of it. So the extreme in his own party don't want to moderate their message. And I mean, we kind of had this issue during the Tea Party era on the right, where it was like you would have people that were so blazing hot on the right that they wanted to eliminate all moderates from their party. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to do the Big Tent thing. And I think that sort of crisis of identity is happening again on the left, though. instead of on the right.
No, I tend to agree with that. I think the left is, again, for the left as we think of them, for the longest time has been rooted by a couple of concepts, and a lot of it was, first of all, left-wing economic policy, which was very redistributive in nature, and the spectrum of left-wing economic policy was everything from capitalist countries with high welfare states and progressive taxation and redistribution of wealth to complete government ownership of the means of production, right? Like that's the spectrum of left-wing economic policy. But then there was also this element of hyper-egalitarianism, right? It was equality. And then the way it developed over time on the left is it really bought into this idea of critical theory. It really brought in this idea, like there was the postmodernist tendencies where, in order to have a truly open society, we have to get rid of this notion of like objective truth. And it's all about perspective, and it's all about identity, and it's all about, intersectionality. The problem is they have gotten to a point where I think a lot of this stuff, it moved way too far, way too fast. During COVID, people became much more aware of what was going on, and to the extent that it had gotten, when they doubled down on the trans movement, I feel like that was something where they really revealed just how far they were willing to go, and how far they were willing to go to criticize, deplatform, fire. They were willing to use the full power of not only social ostracizing, but government power to shut down and deplatform you. And then all of a sudden, more people who had never really been in the realm of politics were awakened to what they were doing and what woke really meant and how far they were willing to go.
There is a question in the chat.
Just let me finish this part right here. And then what the Democratic Party is trying to do right now is you have this certain element of the Democratic Party that still believes in like left-wing politics as a general rule. And they're the ones saying, okay, guys, we need to pivot back to like bread and butter issues, right? We need to pivot back to that. They don't understand that they have built such an important part of their coalition, such an important part of their base, which they absolutely rely on to get out, march, protest, vote, whatever else. They bought into all of this. They are completely bought into the identity politics thing, the critical theory side. And for the Democrats, for the more moderate Democrats, to say, hey guys, we need to readjust, that's treason. Right, that's treason. It is. You are now evil. You're now part of the fascists because you're not willing to save the trans kids of Mississippi, as Christian likes to say, right? And so that's the part where I think they're contending with right now, and they are trying to figure out a path. They're trying to navigate their way through this, but then you see the people that they're picking in primaries, like the mayor. They had a very left-wing Democrat mayor in Minneapolis. They just had a race. They picked, I think he's a Somali immigrant who's...
he was actually born here, but his parents came from Somalia.
Parents came from Somalia. And
not that really changes anything, because he's gone out there saying, we need to care about our homeland.
Yes.
Which is not America.
No, he's
alert.
talking about Somalia. And then he's going around talking about how white people are the problem. Like he is actively campaigning on white people are the problem. And very, very Marxist tendencies, very, very critical theory-based tendencies. And you look at this, it's like, and it was funny because people are very concerned. There are people in the more moderate element, or we'll just say the more aware element within the Democratic Party. Moderate's not even the right term, who realize that this doesn't message well. This does not message well to the people that they have been hemorrhaging, and they are trying to like rein some of it in. And like you said, it's not like Abigail Spanberger said this when she barely won re-election in 2020. She got hot mic'd on a call where she told the Democratic caucus, stop talking about socialism. Stop. This is hurting us when you campaign on this.
I'm pretty sure there was an expletive in there.
There were a bunch of expletives in there too.
It was. Why? And it wasn't, hey, we're not socialists, guys. This isn't what we believe. It was, don't talk about it. It doesn't brief well. You saw the same thing when you had the riots going on in Los Angeles. And everybody's rolling around with every flag except the American one. And then all of a sudden you see people like, we got to carry the American flag. This is feeding into their narrative. They didn't mean, hey, carry the American flag, guys, because we're patriotic and we care about this. And no, it was carry the American flag because the optics are bad. Kind of the overall thing from the Democrat perspective is they're in trouble right now with respect to a messaging component. They're in trouble right now with respect to a leadership component. They're having a hard time organizing around a specific, easy to understand message, as well as good messengers for that message.
They're also having trouble with big news media outlets carrying water for them anymore. And also things like NPR and PBS and all of these things that are getting defunded. They've had a bunch of situations where it was revealed that there's like a lot more scrutiny on them now than before. And they got caught in a whole scandal where Act Blue was funneling big donors' donations through hundreds of small through these people that never even had given, like mostly elderly people and people like that, and making it look as though they had each given the max that you can give for a federal election. So they're trying to track the money and see where this money came from, and they're also recognizing that they have a big old microscope on them now and they've been involved in all kinds of scandalous things with ethics, and it's like they can't hide from it anymore. And so usually they could depend on kind of this apparatus they had in place that I think is sort of limping along now, and they're not able to utilize it as much, and they don't have the chokehold on the information that they used to have. We've got X, where literally nothing gets censored on X almost.
Yeah.
And then all the other news media outlets are also kind of in a race to try to make sure they don't over-censor either, even though they do still engage in it a bit. And so the free flow of information does not go well for Democrats.
No, I think that's actually a really important point that we haven't brought up yet, and that is the Democratic Party used to always be able to depend on a couple of things. One, they had a massive federal bureaucracy that was supportive. Two, and this is something Doge uncovered, billions of dollars were floating into NGOs that were then going back to Democrats in the form of, political contributions. Mm-hmm. Right? When you defund Planned Parenthood for a year, you don't just defund Planned Parenthood from going out and killing babies. You defund an organization that gives tens of millions of dollars to Democrat candidates. And so what ends up happening is a big part of the federal budget was getting rerouted. Now, I don't mean a big part as compared to the entire budget. I just mean hundreds of millions of dollars were getting funneled into left-wing NGOs that were essentially doing, again, it was like, oh, we're a get out the vote, or we're going to go register voters. Yeah, and they only registered voters in deep blue districts, right?
Like a big old money laundering scheme.
Yeah, we're going to do voter education. Well, they only did voter education on left-wing issues and left-wing places. Oh, well, we're going to go do environmental policy. Well, what did they do? They ended up advocating for, so there was this whole campaign wing of the federal government that was essentially working almost unilaterally for Democrats. That has really been cut into.
And take a guess at what has happened since that flow of money has been shut off.
This is, can I just say right now, running as a Republican, there was something every single year I've ran, we always ran, like it was a joke. We always say, hey guys, we know we're going to get outspent. We just can't get outspent 2-1. Or we just can't get outspent 3-1. Like we always went into every single race knowing, like as the Republican caucus, right? That we were going to get outspent significantly. But if we could keep it under 2-1, we could probably win. And so it's always been this foregone conclusion. Yeah, they're going to raise more money, but if we can close the gap, we got this. What's going on this time?
How the turntables.
Michael Scott.
Yeah, so here's an article from New York Post. Top GOP campaign committees dominate Dems in 2025 fundraising. So here's some of the top line numbers here. The Republican National Committee has raked in almost $100 million in donations. It's headed by Michael Whately and Vice President J.D. Vance. And they have $80 million cash on hand, according to the latest FEC filings. That's a Federal Election Commission.
Yeah.
The Democratic National Committee, which is currently headed by Ken Martin. We did a podcast where we talked about him when he came into office earlier this year. Well, they have $69 million and a war chest of only $15 million. So the Democratic Party is broke on the national level, basically. They're bringing in fewer dollars than the Republicans
I've never
currently.
seen numbers like that.
Me neither.
It's usually the opposite.
The war chest disparity of 80 million cash on hand versus 15 million cash on hand is just simply astonishing. So if this money is deployed wisely, which, obviously there's always a huge if on that, because we know how how Republican campaign consultants love to snatch defeat from the jaws
They
of
do.
victory. But if this money is spent wisely, this should give us at least a bit of an edge in some key races in the 2026 midterms. So this is going in our favor. There's another thing that I think is going in our favor, which is that you were bringing up earlier some of the stuff that the Democratic Party does in terms of process, right? They're really obsessed with critical theory, even if they don't understand all this stuff, right? All the philosophy behind it. They're enthralled with critical theory. They're enthralled with postmodernism. But those are all processes. Those aren't really end states.
Yeah.
I struggled for for just myself, let alone looking around. I think that most people, including most Democrats, would struggle to articulate what is it that the Democratic Party believes in, stands for, wants to fight for, aside from we hate Trump, we hate men, we hate white people, we hate America, and we want infinite debt, zero industrial capacity, and open borders. Like, we just want to dissolve everything and everybody just be, living in some entropic soup, and the government just feeds them all with welfare checks. Like, there is no cohesive ideology there aside from we hate certain groups in society.